The boy approached the billionaire kneeling at his wife's grave, holding out a sealed brown envelope. His message was simple. "My grandma told me to give this to you. She was your nanny." Inside was a truth his grandmother had guarded for 60 years, a secret that would dismantle the billionaire's understanding of his entire past and rewrite the legacy of everything he had built. The billionaire was Alexander Vance, a reclusive tech titan worth over $12 billion. The boy was Leo, his nanny's only grandson, and the nanny, Alina, had taken her final breath just 3 days prior. She had given Leo one final, urgent task, but the secret in that envelope wasn't just a piece of forgotten history. It was a living, breathing truth with the power to unravel a legacy and expose a 60-year-old lie. What Alina knew, and what she chose to reveal only after her death, would force Alexander to question every foundation of his life. To understand the weight of that moment in the cemetery, you have to understand who Alexander Vance was and who Alina had been to him. She wasn't just an employee. For a lonely, awkward boy growing up in a cold mansion, she was the only source of unconditional love he had ever known. Alexander's father, Harlan Vance, was a shipping magnate, a man of brutal efficiency who saw affection as a liability. His mother, Genevieve, was a socialite perpetually numbed by prescription cocktails. The family's immense wealth in post-war New York was a gilded cage. Alexander's childhood was a sequence of prestigious boarding schools and silent, echoing holidays. He was brilliant with numbers, terrible with people, a puzzle his parents had no interest in solving. Then in 1958, when Alexander was 7, Alina Wright arrived. She was 24, a recent immigrant from Kingston, Jamaica, with a steady gaze and a voice that carried the warmth of the sun. She was hired to provide structure. She provided salvation. She was the one who found him crying in the library after his father called his science project a trivial distraction. She didn't offer empty platitudes. Instead, she said, "Show me how it works." She was the one who packed secret picnics when his parents forgot his birthday. She defended him from the cook's sharp tongue, soothed his night terrors, and taught him that strength could be quiet, that kindness was not a weakness. She called him my Alex. To everyone else, he was just Vance. The bond was an open secret, quietly scandalous to the old money set. A black nanny, a white heir, the intimacy made people uncomfortable. Harlan Vance tolerated it because Alexander's grades improved and the boy stopped mopping. He never saw the truth. Alina was building the moral framework his fortune never could. She stayed for 12 years until Alexander left for Harvard. The parting was a quiet agony. He offered to buy her a house, set up a trust. She refused it all. "You don't pay for family, Alex," she said. She took a job with another family, but they wrote letters. His grew shorter as he was swallowed by the frenzy of building his own empire, first software, then venture capital, then the global tech behemoth Vance Systems. Her letters remained constant, a gentle, steady thread tethering him to the person he used to be. He visited sometimes, always with extravagant gifts she'd quietly donate. She asked about his work, his health, never about his wealth. She met his wife, Clara, and saw the light in him she hadn't seen in years. She held their firstborn, Thomas, and wept. When Clara died of a sudden aneurysm 15 years ago, Alexander unraveled. Alina, by then in her 70s, took a train to his estate and stayed for a month. She didn't try to fix him. She just made soup, answered the door to the endless stream of condolences, and was present. It was the last time he truly let anyone in. After that, he built walls. He became the reclusive billionaire press profiles described, ruthless, isolated, a ghost in his own crystal towers. The letters from Alina became his only connection to a self he thought was dead. He sent money every month to an account she rarely touched. He assumed it was for her retirement, for comfort. He had no idea it was for something else entirely. 3 days before the cemetery, Alina Wright died peacefully in her sleep at 86. Her funeral was small. Leo, her grandson, was the only family. Alexander Vance was not there. He hadn't been told. The instruction came to Leo in her final hours, a request whispered with urgent clarity. Find Alexander Vance. Give him the envelope yourself. Do not mail it. Do not give it to an assistant. Tell him it's from his L. She made him repeat the address of the cemetery, the day, the time. Clara's anniversary. She knew he would be there. So on that rainy afternoon, Leo did as he was told. He found the man from the news photos, kneeling in the mud, looking hollowed out by grief. The transaction was simple. A sealed envelope, a brief message. Alexander took it with numb fingers, his world already narrowed to a point of pain. He didn't open it there. He placed it on the passenger seat of his Rolls-Royce, where it sat like a silent passenger all the way back to his penthouse. It was hours later, in the stark silence of his study, the city lights sprawling below like a captured galaxy, that he finally slid it open. The contents were sparse, a letter in Aliner's precise, looping script, and beneath it a small, faded photograph. He read the letter. Then he read it again. The air left the room. The photograph showed a young man, perhaps 18, with Alexander's own sharp jawline and his father's piercing light eyes, but with Aliner's warm, dark skin and her unmistakable smile. On the back, in her handwriting, a name and a date. Thomas Wright, your brother, born June 3, 1959. The date was a hammer blow. June 1959. Aliner had been pregnant when she arrived at the Vance mansion. She had been pregnant while caring for a 7-year-old Alexander. The math was merciless, undeniable. The father was Harlan Vance. The letter explained what the photograph could not. She had hidden the pregnancy, given birth in secret with her cousin's help. She'd named him Thomas, raised him herself, telling him his father was a sailor lost at sea. She had kept the secret to protect her son from the brutal scrutiny of the Vance world, and to protect Alexander from a truth she believed would shatter him. She wrote that her Thomas had lived a good, quiet life as a mechanic in Baltimore. He had died 8 years ago in a workplace accident, leaving behind a son, Leo, the boy who delivered the envelope. She ended with a simple, devastating plea. The lies are mine to bear, but Leo is all that's left of your blood. He doesn't know. Please, Alex, see him. Alexander Vance, one of the most powerful men on earth, sat alone in a room full of nothing that mattered, staring at the face of a brother he never knew, a nephew he had just turned away in the rain. The foundation of his life, the story of his lonely, gilded childhood, cracked and fell away. It had never been just him and Aliner against the cold world. There had been a third, a secret son, a hidden heir. And with that revelation, a terrifying question ignited in his mind, cutting through 60 years of grief and isolation. If his father could keep this secret, what other lies was his entire fortune built upon? The first thing Alexander Vance did was not to call his lawyers, but to hire a private investigator. He needed to know if the brother in the photograph was real, and if the boy, Leo, was truly his last living blood relative. What he uncovered in the next 48 hours was a parallel life, one of quiet struggle and dignity, running just beneath the surface of his own gilded existence. Thomas Wright had existed. His trail was clear and consistent. Birth certificate from a small clinic in Queens, listing father as unknown. School records from public schools in Brooklyn. An honorable discharge from the Army after a 4-year stint. He had worked as a master mechanic at a Baltimore trucking depot for 22 years. He was known as a quiet man, fiercely private, exceptionally good with his hands. He had married a schoolteacher named Maria in 1985. Leo was born in 2000. Maria had died of breast cancer when Leo was just 4. Thomas had raised his son alone until his own death in a warehouse accident in 2016, a faulty hydraulic lift that crushed him. The settlement from the depot had been modest, just enough to cover the funeral and leave a small fund for Leo, who went to live with his grandmother, Aliner. The investigator provided photographs, Thomas as a young soldier, Thomas holding a toddler Leo on his shoulders, Thomas, older, standing beside a restored vintage car, a rare, proud smile on his face. Alexander stared at the resemblance. It was unmistakable. The set of the shoulders, the shape of the brow. It was like looking at a ghost from a life he never lived. But one document stopped Alexander cold. It was a copy of Thomas Wright's last will and testament, a single page filed in a Baltimore courthouse. It left everything to my son, Leo. And it was witnessed by one Eleanor Wright and one Harlan Vance, Jr. Harlan Vance, Jr., Alexander's father. The signature was authentic, dated 2010, 6 years before Thomas died, 4 years before Harlan himself passed away. His father had known. Not only had he known, he had been in the same room as his secret son. He had signed his name to a legal document, and he had never, not once, breathed a word of it to Alexander. The betrayal was a physical blow. It meant the secret was not a fleeting affair buried in shame, but a sustained, active deception spanning over 50 years. His father had looked at Thomas, had known he was looking at his own flesh and blood, and had simply walked away. Alexander's next move was impulsive, driven by a grief he couldn't name. He didn't call. He got in his car and had his driver take him to the address in Queens the investigator provided. It was a small, well-kept bungalow on a tree-lined street, Eleanor's home. Leo answered the door, still in his yellow rain jacket, his expression shifting from surprise to wary recognition. "Mr. Vance, may I come in, Leo?" The house was a shrine to a simple, loving life. Photographs of Thomas at every age, of Leo, of Eleanor beaming. The air still smelled faintly of her perfume and the ginger tea she always drank. Leo, with a solemnity beyond his 7 years, made them both tea in the quiet kitchen. "She told me you'd come," Leo said, placing a mug carefully in front of Alexander. "She said you'd have questions." "What did she tell you about me, Leo?" "That you were her first boy, that you were very smart and very sad, and that I was to give you the envelope if anything ever happened to her." He paused. "She said it was important. Was it important?" Alexander looked at this child, his nephew, who had his father's eyes and his grandmother's calm demeanor. "Yes, Leo, it was very important." He took a breath. "The letter, it said that your father, Thomas, was my brother, that we had the same father." Leo blinked, processing. He didn't look shocked, he looked thoughtful. "That makes you my uncle." "It does." "I never had an uncle before." Leo said it as a simple fact. Then he asked the devastating question. "Did you know him, my dad?" The weight of that question crushed Alexander. "No, Leo, I didn't. I wish I had." "He was really good at fixing things," Leo offered, a child's attempt to bridge the enormous gap. "Grandma said he got that from his father, too." In that moment, Alexander Vance, who negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, had no words. He had missed an entire life. He had missed a brother. He was looking at the brother's son, and all he felt was a vast, howling absence. He left an hour later with a promise to return. But his mind was already racing ahead, the emotional shock hardening into a cold, legal dread. If Thomas was Harlan Vance's legitimate son, born out of wedlock, what were his rights? And more pressingly, what were Leo's? Alexander's own will was a fortress, leaving his entire empire to a series of charitable trusts with a generous annuity for any living descendants. He had never married again after Clara. His son, Thomas Vance, named for no reason he now understood, had died in a hiking accident at 22. Leo was, by blood, his closest living relative, but the will specified descendants. It had been written with his own son in mind. Did it include a nephew from an unknown brother? The legal language was suddenly terrifyingly vague. He summoned his estate lawyer, Margaret Thorne, to his penthouse that night. He did not show her the letter. He posed a hypothetical. "Margaret, if it were discovered that my father had an illegitimate child, born during his marriage, what would that child's claim be to his estate?" Margaret, a woman of razor-sharp intellect, didn't blink. "That depends. Did your father acknowledge the child, provide support? If the child was never acknowledged and your father's will doesn't mention them, their claim would be weak but not impossible. They could contest the will, argue they were omitted by accident or design. It would be messy, expensive, and public. Why do you ask? Alexander avoided her gaze. Historical research. The family history is murky. Alexander, Margaret said, her tone shifting. If there is a potential claimant, we need to know. Now, the Vance family trusts are worth over $9 billion. A challenge, even an unlikely one, could tie everything up in courts for a decade. He dismissed her with assurances it was just curiosity, but the seed was planted. The stakes were no longer just emotional. They were financial, legal, existential. The entire Vance legacy, the empire he had built upon his father's shipping fortune, could be thrown into chaos by a piece of paper in a brown envelope. He needed to know the full extent of his father's deception. He went to the one place he had avoided for years, the vault containing his father's personal papers, stored in the sub-basement of the Vance corporate headquarters. For 2 days he lived in that sterile room, surrounded by filing boxes. He found the expected things: business ledgers, contracts, correspondence. And then, in a locked box marked Private Medical, he found a second secret. It was a stack of letters tied with a ribbon between Harlan Vance and Eleanor Wright. They spanned from 1960 to 1975. They were not love letters. They were negotiations, cold, clinical, and brutal. The earliest was from Harlan, dated a month after Thomas's birth. It acknowledged paternity and offered a single payment of $50,000 for Eleanor, silence and discretion. Eleanor's reply, in her elegant hand, was a single line on plain paper. "I do not want your money. I want nothing from you." Subsequent letters showed Harlan's growing frustration. He sent checks which were returned uncashed. He offered to set up a trust for the boy's education. Eleanor refused. "My son is not a business transaction," she wrote in 1965. The final letter from Harlan in 1975 was a threat. It stated that if she ever attempted to contact Alexander or disrupt the family, he would use his considerable influence to have her deported. Eleanor's response was not in the file. Alexander knew there would have been none. She had simply kept her silence for 40 more years. But the most shocking document was not a letter. It was a codicil to his father's will, dated 2010, the same year he witnessed Thomas's will. It was a single damning paragraph. It left the sum of $5 million to Thomas Wright of Baltimore, Maryland, to be held in trust and dispersed at the discretion of the estate's executor. The executor was Alexander. Alexander had never seen this codicil. It had never been filed with the main will. It had never been executed. When Harlan Vance died 4 years later, the $5 million had never been paid. Thomas Wright had died 2 years after that, never knowing the money existed. The executor, Alexander, had been kept in the dark. The implications were staggering. His father had intended to provide for Thomas, however inadequately. But he had hidden the provision from Alexander, perhaps out of shame, perhaps out of a twisted desire to control the narrative from beyond the grave. And by failing to file it properly, or by instructing his lawyers to suppress it, he had ensured it would never be paid. It was a promise designed to be broken. Alexander sat on the cold floor of the vault, the codicil in his trembling hands. He was no longer just the victim of a secret. He was, by legal inheritance, the instrument of its continuation. He had become, unwittingly, the gatekeeper of his brother's disinheritance. And with that realization, a new and more dangerous question formed. If his father's lawyers concealed this, what else had they hidden? And who, in the powerful, entrenched machinery of the Vance estate, was still loyal to a dead man's cruel wishes over the living truth? Confronting his father's old law firm was like walking into a fortress built on his own ignorance. The senior partner, Charles Whitlock, didn't deny the existence of the codicil. Instead, he offered Alexander a chilling justification. "Your father's instructions were clear, Alexander. Some truths are too destructive to be set free. He was protecting the family. We were protecting you." Alexander sat in the opulent, wood-paneled office, the same office where his father had shaped his legacy. Protecting me from what? From knowing I had a brother, from knowing my nephew. From instability, Whitlock said smoothly. Your father's will was a meticulously balanced instrument, introducing a new, unvetted heir, especially one from that background, would have triggered endless litigation from other branches of the family. It would have shattered the trusts, crippled the companies. We executed his final, binding wish, preservation of the estate above all. The cold, legal logic was a trap. It made Alexander complicit. To challenge it was to risk the very empire he'd spent his life building. Whitlock slid a document across the desk, a non-disclosure agreement already drafted, offering Leo a generous but structured trust fund, contingent on Alexander's silence and Leo's waiver of any future claims. It was hush money, formalized. The lawyer's pen sat beside it like a weapon. This is the cleanest solution for everyone, Whitlock said. The boy is provided for. The estate remains intact. The past stays where it belongs. Alexander left the office without signing, the agreement burning a hole in his briefcase. But the meeting had revealed a terrifying new layer. The secret wasn't just a family shame. It was an actively managed corporate liability, guarded by powerful people with a vested interest in the status quo. His own lawyer, Margaret Thorne, was a partner at a firm that often worked with Whitlock's. Who could he trust? His paranoia proved right. 2 days later, Margaret requested an urgent meeting. Her demeanor was different, stripped of its usual professional ease. Alexander, I need to ask you directly. Have you been contacted by, or do you have knowledge of, an individual named Thomas Wright or his heir? He studied her. Why do you ask? Because Charles Whitlock just called me. He informed me that a potentially fraudulent claim against the Vance estate might be forthcoming. He suggested, strongly, that my firm would be wise to coordinate with his to mitigate reputational damage. He's circling the wagons, Alexander, and he's checking to see which side you're on. The institutional net was closing. Alexander made a decision. He couldn't trust the system that had buried his brother. He needed an outsider. He reached out to a renowned forensic genealogist and a journalist who specialized in probate injustice, a woman named Anya Petrova. He gave them the letters, the codicil, and the photograph. Tell me what this really is, he said. What Anya uncovered went far beyond a single hidden child. By cross-referencing the dates in the letters with Harlan Vance's travel records and old corporate ledgers, she found a pattern. In the early 1960s, Harlan had quietly funneled money through a shell company into a small Baltimore trust. The trust had paid the mortgage on Alina's house. It had paid for Thomas's trade school. The payment stopped abruptly in 1975, the same year Harlan sent the deportation threat. It wasn't guilt, it was control. He had been providing support, not as a father, but as a landlord of their silence. And when Alina refused to be controlled, he cut them off. But the biggest shock was yet to come. Anya, digging into the Vance estate's charitable foundations, found a series of anonymous scholarships established in 2011. They were for underprivileged students pursuing mechanical trades. One of the first recipients was a young man named Leo Wright for a summer robotics camp. The foundation director had no record of who requested it. The paper trail led back to a directive from Harlan Vance's office, signed months before he died. He had known about Leo. He had, in his own twisted way, tried to provide for his great-grandson, while keeping his own grandson, Alexander, in the dark. The old man's conscience had been a divided, secret thing, capable of a gesture of charity, but utterly incapable of honesty. The weight of this new truth was suffocating. His father hadn't been a monster. He had been something worse, a man who knew the right thing to do and chose again and again to do it in the shadows, preserving his own reputation at the cost of his family's wholeness. Alexander had spent his life trying to be nothing like his cold father. Now he saw the irony. He too had built a life of isolated control. He was facing the same choice, the clean, quiet buyout or the messy, public truth. He went to see Leo again. This time he asked Leo's temporary guardian, a kind neighbor named Mrs. Garcia, for permission to take him out for the day. They went to the Natural History Museum. Leo was mesmerized by the dinosaur skeletons. As they stood under the towering T-Rex, Leo looked up at Alexander. "My dad liked dinosaurs too. He had a book." "I didn't know that," Alexander said, his throat tight. "There's lots of stuff nobody knows," Leo said, with a simple shrug that carried the wisdom of children who have experienced loss. In that moment, Alexander's decision crystallized. He would not be the curator of another generation's silence. He would not offer Leo a trust fund with a gag order. He would not become his father. The backlash was swift and brutal. When he informed Margaret Thorne, he intended to amend his will to formally recognize Leo as his heir and to publicly acknowledge Thomas Wright as his brother. She resigned as his counsel. "I can't be part of this, Alexander. You're inviting a war you may not win." The next morning, a cryptic item appeared in a financial gossip column. "Is the reclusive tech titan V being influenced by newfound family? Concerns raised about estate stability." The shot across the bow was clear. Whitlock and the old guard were preparing to fight dirty, to paint Leo and the memory of a leaner as gold diggers, to protect the sanctity of the Vance fortune. Alexander's personal reputation and Leo's future were now on the table. He called Anya Petrova, the journalist. "If I give you the full story with documentation, what happens?" "It becomes real," she said. "It can't be buried again. But you need to understand they will come for you. They'll attack her character, they'll question the boy's paternity, they'll say you're emotionally compromised. It will get ugly." Alexander looked at the photograph of Thomas on his desk, at the brotherly smile he would never see in person. "It's already ugly," he said. "Let's make it true." The stage was set for a collision between private wealth and public truth, between a 60-year-old lie and a 7-year-old boy. Alexander Vance was about to dynamite the foundation of his own legacy. But as he prepared to step into the light, he had no idea that the deepest secret, the one that would change everything, was still waiting to be found. The article by Anya Petrova was published on a Sunday morning. It was not a salacious exposé, but a meticulously documented story titled "The Other Son," a billionaire's secret brother and the nanny who kept his world intact. It began not with scandal, but with a photograph. Eleanor Wright, young and smiling, holding the hands of two little boys, one white, one black, on the steps of the Vance mansion. The caption read, "Alexander and Thomas, 1962. The world saw what Alexander had never known, that for a brief, stolen period he had known his brother. The photograph, found in an album in Eleanor's house, showed two boys, aged roughly 4 and 3, grinning with identical gaps in their teeth. Thomas had been brought to the mansion as a playmate from the neighborhood. Eleanor had risked everything to let her sons know each other, if only for a few afternoons. Alexander had no memory of it." The article wove together the letters, the codicil, the financial records, and the testimony of the now-adult staff who remembered a quiet, dark-skinned boy who visited in the summers. It painted a portrait not of a scandal, but of a profound, sustained love triangle between a mother and her two sons, separated by a wall of money and racism. The public reaction was not the fury the old guard feared, but a massive wave of empathy. Eleanor was hailed as a heroine of quiet sacrifice. Thomas was mourned as a lost everyman. And Alexander, instead of being painted as a dupe, was seen as a victim of the same cold system, now trying to make it right. The narrative of corporate cover-ups and silenced women resonated in a way Whitlock's firm had not anticipated. The story trended globally for 72 hours. The legal and financial fallout was immediate and severe, but not in the way expected. The pressure of public scrutiny was a disinfectant. 3 days after publication, the board of the Vance Family Charitable Trust voted unanimously to immediately execute the long-suppressed codicil, granting the $5 million with interest to Leo as Thomas's heir. It was a public relations necessity, but it was also justice, however delayed. Whitlock's firm issued a statement expressing regret for following a client's instructions too rigorously and announced a review of their ethical protocols. The fortress of silence had crumbled under the light. Alexander, however, was focused on something more important than money or reputation. He filed a petition in family court to become Leo's legal guardian. The process was swift, supported by Mrs. Garcia's testimony, and a battalion of social workers who reported that Leo, in Alexander's care, was thriving. The day the papers were signed, Alexander brought Leo to his penthouse not as a visitor, but as a resident. He gave him the room that had been his own son. Leo placed his dinosaur book on the shelf and said, "It's very tall here." Alexander, for the first time in decades, laughed. He began the process of rewriting his will, not in secret, but with transparency. He established the Billionaire and Thomas Wright Foundation, endowed with $500 million, focused on vocational training and housing for single parents. Leo was named the primary beneficiary of his personal estate, with a board of independent advisors to manage it until he was 25. He also created a scholarship in Thomas's name at the trade school he had attended. He sent a copy of the new will to Anya Petrova and invited her to publish it. There would be no more secrets. The final, surprising detail emerged during the clearing of Alina's house. Leo found a small, locked metal box at the back of her closet. Inside was not more scandal, but a stack of savings bonds and a passbook for a credit union account. The bonds, purchased in small denominations over 50 years, were worth nearly $200,000. The passbook showed monthly deposits of exactly $100 from an account owned by Harlan Vance from 1960 until 1975, the controlled support he'd offered. But then, after a 15-year gap, the deposits resumed in 1990. This time, they were from an account owned by Alexander Vance. For 26 years, Alexander had been sending Alina a monthly stipend of $100, a token of thanks he'd set up automatically after Harvard. She had never cashed a single check. Instead, she had deposited everyone into this account for Leo. The balance was over $31,000. A note paperclipped to the passbook read in her handwriting, "For Leo's future," from both his fathers. She had taken the guilt money from Harlan and the love money from Alexander and transformed them into the same thing, a legacy of care. Alexander held the passbook, the physical proof of her endless, ingenious love. She had taken the flawed offerings from both Vance men and purified them into a single gift for her grandson. It was her final, quiet lesson. Love isn't about the amount, but the intention. And legacy isn't about blood, but about what you build with it. The story ends not with a courtroom victory or a corporate takeover, but with a simple scene. A year after the article, Alexander and Leo are at the cemetery again, this time in sunshine. They stand before two new headstones placed beside Clara's. One reads Thomas Wright, beloved son, father, brother, 1959-2016. The other reads Alina Wright. She held the world together, 1934-2023. Leo, now 8, places a single white rose on each. He looks up at Alexander. "Do you think they know we're here?" "Yes," Alexander says, his hand on the boy's shoulder. "I think they do." He looks from the graves to his nephew, the living bridge between all the broken pieces of his history. The Vance fortune was no longer a gilded cage, but a tool. The family was no longer a story of lonely power, but of chosen connection. The secret had not destroyed his legacy. It had forced him to build a real one. The journey that began with a sealed envelope in the rain had come full circle, from hidden truth to healing light. And as they turned to walk back to the car, Alexander Vance, the billionaire who had once had everything and nothing, finally understood what his nanny had been trying to tell him all along. The greatest wealth was not in what you keep, but in what you finally, bravely, choose to give away. So what do we make of a story like this? It's easy to see it as a tale about billionaires and secrets, about fortunes and hidden heirs. But at its heart, this is a story about the quiet people who hold families together, and the moments that force us to choose between the legacy we inherit and the legacy we want to leave. Alina Wright was not a powerful woman in the traditional sense. She had no wealth, no title, no public influence. Yet with nothing but her integrity and her love, she shaped the moral compass of 2 generations of men. She held a painful truth for 60 years, not out of malice, but out of a fierce, protective love. And in the end, she entrusted that truth not to a lawyer or a court, but to a child, knowing that innocence sometimes carries a message further than any legal document ever could. Alexander Vance's journey shows us that no amount of money can insulate you from the human need for connection, for truth, for family. His greatest act was not building an empire, but dismantling the walls around his own heart. He could have taken the easy, quiet path, the signed agreement, the suppressed codicil, the lifetime of polite lies. Instead, he chose the messy, public, and ultimately healing path of honesty. He realized that a legacy built on secrecy is a hollow one, and that the true worth of a fortune is measured not by its size, but by its capacity to do good. And Leo, the boy who started it all, represents our most hopeful instinct, that the future doesn't have to be bound by the secrets of the past. He is the living proof that love and truth can weave a broken history back together into something new and whole and strong. This story asks a simple, profound question that applies to every single one of us, regardless of our bank accounts. What are we willing to uncover, and what are we willing to forgive in order to become whole? What silent burdens are we carrying that, if released, might not destroy our world but actually save it? The lesson here is timeless. The bonds that truly matter are not always written in wills or recorded in family trees. They are written in quiet acts of care, in the courage to face difficult truths, and in the choice to see someone who needs something, and to do it. If this story reminded you of the power of truth, of family in all its forms, and of the quiet heroes in our lives, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let us know in the comments what this story brought up for you. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed your perspective? Or have you been the keeper of a truth that needed the right moment to be told? We make these stories to remind each other of what matters, to remind us that it's never too late to make a different choice, to build a different legacy, to become the person our most loving mentors always knew we could be. Thank you for listening. If you want to join us for more stories that explore the hidden connections and quiet courage that shape our lives, please subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll see you in the next story.